2, 3, record. Thank you. So we're going to start this presentation session. Good morning, my name is Yui. Good afternoon, my name is Yui and I'm the room host and I'm here to provide support for this presentation. I have to make one important announcement. Chat is open, but please not send out any unsolicited links or contact information to individual participants. Throughout the presentation, we will ask you to keep your microphones muted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them in the meeting chat area so the presenter is going to ask them later. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce the presenters and title of the presentation. So today's presenter is Sachi Oshima. She's a research fellow at the Research Institute for Policy Studies to the university. After working at the Japan Foundation as a chief officer, she's currently a teacher at Tsuda University, Shibata Institute of Technology, Tamagawa University, and Tokyo Future University. Her research interests are related to TESOL and intercultural exchange project. Her presentation title is Online Explicit Reading Strategy Instruction using 2-web camera. All right, so Oshima-san, please go ahead to start your presentation.
Thank you very much for introducing Yui-san. Okay, so I would like to share my slide. Okay, all right. My name is Sachi Oshima, and I'm a research fellow at the Tsuda University. I'm also working for several universities located in Tokyo area as a part-time lecturer. Today, the title is Online Explicit Reading Strategy Instruction using 2-web camera. And the contents of my presentation is here. So first, I would like to talk about background of the study, followed by the theoretical background. And then I will talk about the method and result and discussion. Lastly, I would like to take some time for you to ask me some question, and I would like to answer your question as well. Okay, so let me start from the background. Many college English teachers in Japan have been faced with strong needs to help beginner-level students improve their English skills. The Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, Technology in Japan, or MEXT, showed that only 31.9% of senior high school graduates are considered to reach the A2 level of the CFR, which means that almost 60% of them are at the A1 basic English users. Because of the substantial number of beginner-level students, 66.1% public and private universities in Japan have introduced remedial education. In face-to-face lessons before COVID-19 pandemic, I experienced my student reaction as shown on the slide. Teacher, which means I. Question number 1, is it true or false? Student A, false. Good. Why do you think so? Huh? Or another example. Please fill in the blank. What's your answer? A, B, C, or D? The student said B. Okay, where do you find this information in the textbook? Where? From these students' reaction, I wondered whether beginner-level students often answer comprehension questions without understanding the text. In fact, Nation 2009 pointed out the problems of comprehension question, saying that from the learner's point of view, the most important information that they will gain from making an error is that they made a wrong choice, and their interest will be discovering what the right answer is, rather than in discovering what they should do to avoid similar error in the future. Due to their insufficient English knowledge and skills, many Japanese college students have found it difficult to read an English text. Previous literature has supported the notion that good readers can utilize various reading strategies. Comparing good and weak readers, Tui pointed out that good readers are strategic and active participants in their reading process, while weak readers have a passive attitude to just read with suffering a severe lack of basic foundation, and they do not understand what they read. It appears that weak readers, in other words, beginner-level learners, need to understand how English text can be or should be read by using reading strategies, and that is why I found it necessary to provide reading strategy instruction. Moreover, since the fiscal year 2020, due to the pandemic of COVID-19, almost all English lessons have been conducted using online video conference platform called Zoom. It cannot be denied that online lesson brought about an additional burden for the student with low English proficiency, who often find it difficult to keep up with lesson, even in a face-to-face setting. The challenge that suddenly arose for many teachers today was making their instruction clear and understandable for these beginner-level students in online lessons. Now I move on to theoretical background. This literature review first focuses on reading strategy and the effectiveness of explicit strategy interaction. Secondly, the concept of semiotic field is focused on, which is relevant to my study. First, about the reading strategies. Gravier and Stoller define reading strategies as ability that are potentially open to conscious reflection and reflect the reader's intention to address a program or specific goal while reading. Reading strategies include guessing the meaning of unknown vocabulary and context, grasping the main idea or gist from the text, in other words, skimming or summarizing the idea, and looking for a particular piece of information or scanning, taking notes, underlining or highlighting, in other words, annotation, or monitoring main idea comprehension. Among these reading strategies, Nation and Gravier and Stoller pointed out the effectiveness of introducing skimming and scanning on reading fluency. Some previous studies have uncovered the positive effect of explicit reading strategy instruction on student reading comprehension. For example, Macaro and Eller conducted a quasi-experimental study for young L2 French learners in England and investigated the effectiveness of reading strategy instruction. They provided explicit instruction in reading strategy for 14 months. The researcher concluded that strategy instruction improved comprehension of both simple and more elaborate texts, brought about changes in strategy use, and improved attitude toward reading. For another example, Gaye and Tan also conducted a quasi-experimental study targeting Iranian ELF high school students. After providing explicit instruction in reading strategy for 4 months, they concluded that the treatment group achieved significantly better results than the contrast group, and the reading comprehension and reading strategy use improved strategy-based instruction. Both studies supported the effectiveness of explicit instruction in reading strategies. However, previous researcher has also suggested that there is still not enough study focusing on L2 learners. Gravier and Stoller suggested that the research on reading strategy in L2 context is surprisingly limited, despite many discussions of the importance of reading strategy to improve student reading abilities. Above all, despite that the substantial number of college students need remedial education today, Japanese ELF college students with low English proficiency have not been paid much attention. Thus, it is necessary to explore whether explicit reading strategy instruction can improve Japanese beginner level student L2 English reading. Secondly, about the semiotic fields. This study employs a multimodal approach that regards communication to be more than about language. The purpose of multimodal study is to investigate how participants use linguistic codes and embodied resources, such as gesture and movement, in their communication. Among embodied resources, I focused on semiotic fields. Goodwin suggested that the person's action is built on multiple semiotic fields. For example, the act of pointing, which is one of the frequently used body movement by teachers. Goodwin explained that the pointing is constituted as a meaningful act through the mutual contextualization of range of semiotic resources. For another example, Hanks focused on the function of deixis or deictic words, such as Japanese koko or kore. So he pointed out that deixis is a framework for organizing the actor's access to the context of speech at the moment of utterance. Comparing teachers' pointing gesture with non-human cues in video lectures, P, Hon, and Yan concluded that the teacher's pointing gesture was superior to non-human cues in improving learner performance and guiding visual attention to relevant context. Therefore, the semiotic fields, especially pointing and the use of deixis, seem worthwhile to be examined in online Zoom lectures. The purpose of this study is to examine the effectiveness of using the additional camera during explicit reading strategy instruction in online lesson for students with low English proficiency. It poses the following research question. How did beginner level students perceive and evaluate the teacher's online reading strategy instruction through the additional camera? Okay, move on to method. Participants. 20 Japanese college freshman students participated in the study. No student majored in English at the university. The participant was selected by convenience sampling because I was a teacher for them. This university set 4 levels of this English course. Their courses was lowest level, and the student whose TOEIC score was below 400 or around 300. Those are assigned to this lowest level. All participants gave informed consent to me as a researcher. As for the reading strategy instruction, I followed these sequences as you see on the slide. At the beginning of the course, I introduced the expression to indicate the location in the reading text. Paragraph X, line Y. Then the student went through the following sequence. 1. Read the comprehension question first. 2nd, look at the text and search for the particular piece of information. Do not try to translate every single word. And 3rd, underline or highlight the sentence. And 4, answer the question and at the same time, answer where they find the information using the expression paragraph X, line Y. By the above sequence, the student had no choice but to read the text. In other words, they were encouraged to answer questions by reading text, not by just guessing. And about the equipment, I used one laptop computer with a built-in speaker and a microphone, LED light, and 2 cameras. One is to shoot my face, and the other one is shoot my hand and explicitly show what I am pointing at in an English text. The data analyzed for this study were student questionnaire, student group interviews, and individual interviews. Result and discussion. At first, I would like to share the result of student questionnaire. In response to the question, how did you feel about online reading lessons? 13 students out of 20 answered very easy to understand, and 7 students answered easy to understand. As for the reason for their answers, most students pointed out that they could see the teacher's hand highlighting and the textbook. Secondly, here is a result of the group interview. For gathering information from the group of students and elicit their perception shown in common, I employed the method of standardized interviews. I asked each of the students the following two predetermined questions in Japanese. 1. How did you feel about this course? 2nd, what did you think of online lesson? So I asked two same questions to everybody and see the frequency of their answer. As a result of structural coding in terms of frequency, my use of the additional camera showing my hand was the third most frequent feature reported by the student, followed by the student negative feeling at the beginning of the course and their positive feeling during the lesson they took. Not only did these students mention the use of an additional camera, but they also positively evaluated this. About the effect of reading strategy instruction, explicit reading strategy instruction using the expression paragraph X, line Y will positively influence beginner level student reading comprehension. Some students share their comment that it was the first time for me to read a textbook in this way. By searching for information corresponding to the question, I found that I could understand the text. Before this course, I had translated every English word into Japanese and then tried to understand the content. Now I can pick important parts from the text. So the expression paragraph X, line Y help beginner level students read English sentences through finding information in an English text. As for the use of two cameras, more specifically, the use of an additional camera showing my hand will bring about three effects that interweave one another. 1, visualizing the focus of attention. 2, encouraging the student to use reading strategies. And 3, facilitating the student understanding of the lesson. First, visualizing the focus of attention. Student made a comment that I could see the teacher's hand and it was easy to understand how to draw a line and what point we had to look at. Teacher's hand was clearly shown. I could fully understand where I should underline in the text. So the student positively evaluated the use of additional camera because the camera made it easier for them to identify the focus of attention and semiotic fields. The teacher, I, could purposefully constrain and guide the student attention by selectively shooting a certain part in the textbook, pointing the specific word or sentence, and using diacritics. Second, encouraging the student to use reading strategies. This is a quote from the individual interview. By the way, how did you learn reading in your senior high school? Did you translate? Yeah, from the beginning until the end, it took 2 hours or 3 hours to do that. Oh, didn't you sleepy? Well, it took a very long time, so I forgot that I had learned in the previous lesson. I see. Yeah, by identifying the part to answer question and underline this part, it was easy for me to look back later. Also, through the question, I could understand the content of the textbook. So the student response in the interview also suggested that the additional camera helped the newly employed reading strategy, especially scanning and annotating. And finally, third point, facilitating the student understanding of lesson. The student comment were improved like also underlining and making in the textbook were very clear. I could see the teacher's hand, so it's easy for me to understand whether I missed something or not. So the use of the additional camera facilitates the student understanding of lessons. And one more extra benefit I gained from this study. This is show and the photocopy brings intersubjectivity. So from the student comment, I could understand because a textbook was shown. And secondly, if the teacher had written on the blackboard or used PowerPoint slide, I could not have followed the lesson. For the student who read a paper textbook, in front of their PC, showing the photocopy by the additional camera was very, very real. It's exactly the same as what they looking at. So the beginner level student could keep up with online lesson and even deepening their understanding. So in conclusion, explicit reading strategy instruction using the expression paragraph X line Y positively influence beginner level student reading comprehension. The use of the additional camera along with the teacher's pointing gestures and use of the axis will maximize this effect of strategy instruction. The use of an additional camera will bring about three effects that interweave one another. First, visualizing the focus of attention. Second, encouraging the student to use reading strategy. And third, facilitating the student understanding of lessons. And additionally, following the showing the photocopies using the additional camera can create intersubjectivity, which facilitate the beginner level student understanding of lesson and contribute to enhancing positive attitude to study. So that's all for my presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Oshima. All right, so now we're going to accept some questions to her. So if you have any other further questions that you want to ask, you can always raise your hand.
May I ask a question?
Yep.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Then as for the reading strategies, I have a question about are there any difficulties of the teaching strategy, scanning or skimming to low-level students?
You mean the difficulty?
Yeah, then I think that your students say that they translated English into Japanese every single word. So skimming and scanning is totally different from what they learned English when they were high school students.
Yeah. So if I had just introduced, okay, looking for the information, then it's difficult for them to do it. But I didn't say skimming or scanning. Instead of using skimming or scanning, I just said search for information and underline. You don't have to write the answer. Instead of it, just underline it. Where do you find this information? Then the student, without noticing this is like skimming or scanning, but they actually doing the skimming and scanning. So I didn't use that word. Instead, I let them just search for the information, and then it works well.
Thank you very much.
Or if there is some time, maybe it's better for you to experience how my student see my hand. So this is the camera. Second camera is pointed here. And here is my hand. So, and if there is some question or if some answers, and then I will here is a paragraph 1 and a line 1, 2, 3, 4. And okay, here is it. For example, there is it. Yeah. Like this. So maybe student can clearly understand where I'm pointing out, where I draw an underline, or sometimes I can write like this is a paragraph 1, and this is a paragraph 2, and 3, and 4. And okay, here is the answer for number 1, something like that. So maybe it's so you can see the images on that. Any other question? Oh, so Aeon Chao Sensei.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. I was just wondering from a technical standpoint, what kind of equipment are you using? I really like the idea of using a second camera to show the students, to make it visible for the students to be able to see what you're highlighting and where you are in the text. But Yeah. Could I ask? Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, this is you can find. Actually, I bought this camera from the Amazon, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, last year at the beginning of the last fiscal year, because of the sudden COVID-19 pandemic, that
Mhm.
any kind of web resources such as a webcam or any kind of resources seems to be unavailable. So I search on the Amazon and try to get some webcam to show my hand. And this is a kind of document camera, so shoga camera in Japanese.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will put the name of the brand on the chat later so that you can look at that Amazon as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Any kind of document camera can be work.
Oh, okay.
I think.
And that's the one that's hanging
Yeah.
from the top and it's just always facing down, right?
Here is it.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Aya-san, how about you?
Hi, Sachi. Thanks for the very informative presentation. I'm just wondering whether you have some future research idea that this time you survey the students who took your online classes, right? But I'm very curious to know how the student would respond to your instructions with a semiotic assistance in the face-to-face setting classes. I mean, how students can benefit from taking your class in person by looking at your directions recorded on the Shoga camera. So do you have any plans for that?
Yeah, thank you very much for your great question, Aya-san. Actually, in this full semester, I had to conduct a hybrid lesson, which means the half of the students are taking online and the half of the students are attending in class. So I have to juggle the two modes at the same time, but the use of this camera works very, very well. So I can share, I can shoot my hand and share the video via Zoom. So online student, half of the student can watch the online lesson as usual. And I use a projector in the classroom.
Yes.
So I show my PC in the classroom screen. So half of the student attending in class also can look at the screen and they can understand what I'm pointing at the same time. So from this experience, my future research can be that even though all of the students are in class, but still the use of this camera can be effective because the student in class are open the textbook and looking at the blackboard, but in this circumstances, they cannot look at my hand specifically. So even in class, in-person class mode, maybe it is worthwhile to examine the effectiveness of using this another camera. And in that case, I can put the video camera shooting the student and whether student respond to by looking at my pointing at. In the online mode, it's difficult to understand, it's difficult to capture how they behave in response to my instruction. But in the face-to-face setting, I can capture the student reaction.
Yeah, thanks so much for extended response. So I see many possibilities to expand the context of your experiment or your research. And thank you very much for sharing your wonderful plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I would like to share here. Yes. I'm not so sure whether this brand, I'm not so sure whether this brand is the best or not. I'm not so sure. This is one I could gain at the time of the beginning of the fiscal year 2020. So I'm not so sure whether this is best or not. But as far as so far, yeah, this works very well for me. So the bland words on the chat right now. Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
I guess there's no more question. All right. Okay. So this yeah, this is the end of the presentation. So thank you so much for having presentation, Ms. Oshima, and let's offer a round of applause to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
joining my section.
Thank you. And I just sent in the chat about the link of if you have any other question to her, you can continue your discussion in this link. So make sure you use that one. And yeah, that's it. So thank you so much, and please feel free to read this room. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sachi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aya-san. Thank you for joining.